everybody. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining me. What's this, you may say? This is not the studio. Where are we? I am lurking in the darkened downstairs room today because today is one of those days, I don't know if you can remember, it will probably be a couple of weeks' time before this goes out. So cast your mind back when it's raining and pissing it down outside and it's cold and there was a time when it was 27 degrees and really hot, and my studio is just unbearable at the moment. So I'm downstairs in the bottom of the house where it's darkest and coolest, but that does also mean that it's quite dark down here. So I'm hoping that you're going to be able to see when we take a look at, that's right, July's issues of White Dwarf, which is what we're going to be looking at imminently. So yeah, I hope there'll be enough light for you to see. Otherwise, I shall have to go and sweat upstairs, and nobody wants to see that. So the video will be very brief, and I will be dripping all over the magazines, and let's not have that happen. So let's take a dive in. This is issue 79, and this is issue 139, and that's what we're going to look at. And there's some very special stuff in here, so that's what we're going to do. Let's get on with it. Nice vivid colours, not too much shine on them. I think we're going to be alright. I think we're going to get away with it. So let's have a look at the earliest of our White Dwarfs. This is issue 79. This is July 1986, and on the cover we have one of my favourite pieces of fantasy art of all time. It is, of course, John Blanche's Amazonia Gothique, Gothic Amazon, also known as Kinky Cassette. This really just glorious colours, glorious composition. My sculpting challenge, which I haven't done for a while yet, actually, I should do it again. What I certainly used to do for a few years was to try and sculpt this as a model, and see how good I'd got or not over the previous years. So I've done, I think, 3, maybe 4 versions of this model. One of them got a limited edition release. One of them ended up being a commission piece. It was actually a dwarf version of this, so it had really big heels up to here, and then the rest of the body was a small dwarf Amazon woman. I haven't yet done one that I'm absolutely totally happy with, but I do actually have one of the limited edition Citadel models of this, so I should paint that up as well and maybe have another go at it. It was interesting watching a video with John Blanche recently where he was talking about this painting, and he said that this hairdo gave the sculptors quite a tricky proposition. And absolutely, because this is very two-dimensional. What's going on here? I mean, is this like a big white afro, like a dandelion head on her hair, in which case that's a really big chunky bit of lead and it doesn't look quite right and it doesn't mould very well, and there's all sorts of spikes and bits on here, so it's a very tricky model to sculpt, particularly with a view to casting, but there are some good ones around. Kev White did a very good version of it a little while ago. So we are now firmly into White Dwarf being produced in Nottingham, and Ian Livingstone has, although he's still credited as editor-in-chief here, he's left the editorial now to Paul Cockburn, who's taking over the editorial of White Dwarf in Nottingham. And one of the changes that's going to be made, according to this editorial, throughout this magazine is that miniatures adverts where they contain lead are going to have a little health and safety warning saying that they contain lead, which is very sensible, and we still do that today because we still produce lead miniatures, even though, let me just zoom out a little bit, don't want you to see too much of my floor. Yes, even though white metal is a thing, it's very expensive and it tears mould, so a lot of manufacturers still use a lead-based, but at this point there was a bit of fear that lead would be banned completely in the sale of toy soldiers, and so that sort of disclosure was them getting a bit of ahead of the game, saying no, they're not toys, they're miniature figurines for adults only. So that's part of that disclosure. Anyway, here in Open Box, we're looking at Palladium's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles role-playing game. This, of course, being before the cartoon on TV. This is based on the comic book series. The original comic book series is a lot darker, a lot weirder than the comic ended up being. And also Marvel Superheroes, Secret Wars, Black Sword, the next instalment of the Stormbringer, Elric role-playing, and Terror from the Stars, a scenario for Call of Cthulhu. So fairly well-rounded overview of role-playing games, still role-playing games there, with a bit of paranoia and some Ghostbusters thrown in. Here's some suggestions for where to start with Middle-earth role-playing. And with most of these articles, I guess it would be fairly self-explanatory if you've done it before, but it's always useful to see how somebody else is approaching it. You never know, hidden away amongst the fairly obvious statements, there may be some gems, and there are in here. It's interesting. It gives you a sort of overview of the ages of Middle-earth and some ideas for setting it in sort of alternative. There's even a suggestion in here that you set it in our times as a later age of Middle-earth, which of course Tolkien definitely sort of suggested and hinted that Middle-earth was a point in the back in the history of our world now, or at least their world then. And the suggestion in here is that maybe some of the creatures from Tolkien have somehow lingered on into the modern world. I would find that less interesting to play than straight in Tolkien's world, but it throws up some interesting points about playing with it if you've got people who are familiar with Tolkien's world and perhaps know more about it than characters in that setting would know about it. And then it gives you some possible examples of how you might approach certain settings. Just skipping through quite a lot of this. A lot of this is not that interesting. Thread the Barbarian gets driving lessons from a certain Max. Here are some alternative rules for psionics in D&D or AD&D. It's very detailed stuff. It's stuff for people who like lots of rules and intricacies, but it makes some points that are more generally interesting, talking about how psionics might develop in people, what to do about latent psionics. It makes the whole thing a bit more interesting, and in fact starts off by suggesting that actually psionics are something that's so complicated that most people just ignore them, and that they're missing out by not having a degree of psionic. They're not suggesting that everyone should be psionic, but a degree of it in the games, and ways of approaching it that make it a bit more approachable and a bit more fun. But it is still very, very rulesy. Whether it's an improvement on what's in the rulebook, I couldn't tell you. Here is Ghost Jackal Kill, a Call of Cthulhu scenario, featuring one of my favourite mythos creatures, the Hounds of Tindalos. There are lots of excellent interpretations of the Hound of Tindalos throughout. The scenario itself, like all Call of Cthulhu scenarios I find, or most of them anyway, it's very dependent on the investigators asking the right one question in the right place and making the right find hidden roll in the right place. And I feel like if you didn't do that and you were playing this scenario, you'd just miss everything. And you'd come away thinking that you just had a nice drive in the countryside and found a dead body and reported it to the police, and then went on driving on the countryside, and nothing really happened. Until the very end, and then be like, what, how, what, when did that happen? So I feel like players could be very confused, which maybe is part of the Call of Cthulhu thing, but I often find that Call of Cthulhu is a little too dependent on the right person making the right roll, and then kind of leaves you in the dark if you don't make it. Here's another D&D article. This is talking about IQ. in role-playing games in general, but specifically in D&D. There was an article previously, I don't know if you remember it, that suggested that a stat for intelligence in role-playing games was not particularly helpful. This is arguing the alternative point, making out that the usual players aren't their characters. Players know stuff that their characters don't. Players' characters know stuff that the players don't. But it also admits the point that a single intelligence stat doesn't give you that whole rounded view. So here's some different ways of looking at and interpreting understanding of intelligence within a role-playing situation. Here are some beautiful, beautiful pages from Kev Adams. Heavy Metal, of course. We're not on Tabletop Heroes anymore. We're on Heavy Metal, and these will be familiar to a lot of you, I'm sure. Kev's Machineries of Destruction here with his little homemade plants, Venus flytraps and mushrooms and things on the base. This interests me that you've got three views here. This model, of course, the converted Grunters or Snorters champion that became or was used as Groggoth Skullcracker in the Goblinoids Combat Cards deck, which, if you have been following my blog for a while, you might know that I have done a full set of the Goblinoids Combat Cards, which involved converting and painting this guy, and so this was a really good source of other photos of it. You're very limited to other photos of the miniatures in that deck, but here's at least some slight side views showing how the conversion's been done, what's actually going on, and some better quality photos. So that was very useful for me. Kev, of course, being known as the Goblin Master, painted some lovely stuff. Doesn't play doesn't play the game. Hasn't ever played the game, despite posing next to a mighty goblin army. Doesn't really have a mighty goblin army. He's a bit like me. He just likes painting the odd figure that stands out every now and again. So that's interesting, but nice to have his take on painting stuff, even if it's not too different from the party line. It's a bit of a showcase for his work. I should be looking for, have we got it here? Oh yes, so Archeton here at the bottom. This has a little disclaimer. Metal miniatures contain lead. The letters pages, there are two main discussions going on here. The first one is a kind of satanic panic. Oh, Christians think that role-playing games and war games are satanic, and some Christians who say, no, we play D&D and we understand that it's just make-believe, and it actually teaches you some other values which are useful. So, and the discussion continues in these pages, and a bit more of a discussion on which role-playing games should get featured in White Dwarf. Is there too much D&D? Is there too much Call of Cthulhu? What about some of the lesser known ones? Why is there no RuneQuest in here these days? What happened to Traveller? That kind of thing. Here is an article on using psi judges, extremely powerful psi judges in Judge Dredd, the role-playing game. Here is an advert for two of the best ogres ever sculpted, Hrothjog, of course, and Scrag the Slaughterer, who are definitely still $1.95 each, right? You can still definitely pick them up for that, with a bit of their backstory. Interestingly, though, there is no disclaimer on this page that says that these contain lead. Tut tut. Inconsistent Games Workshop. This is a compilation of small snippets of stories that may act as launching off points for role-playing games, or different takes on role-playing games. They're a bit weird, but I guess they serve a purpose. Gobbledygook here, getting into a big fight with the Creeps, the rival gang to his own Skulks gang. This is a very early D100. Standard games, miniatures contain lead. Doesn't say that alchemy do. Maybe lead pewter was not lead pewter. Maybe it was food grade pewter. And then on the back we've got some of those brilliant Kev Adams machineries of destruction that we saw on the inside, this Skull Crasher and the Goblin King's Battle Chariot. Both quite different, but yes, both included together in this machineries of destruction box, and the Heroic Fighters of the Known World and Chaos Dwarf Renegades, more excellent, dare I say, iconic Citadel box sets. There we go. Okay, nice offerings from the Nottingham boys, but still surprisingly very roleplay focused, despite moving up to be among Citadel. All of the lots of miniature stuff hasn't really started coming yet. There's a bit here, but it's still very much a role-playing magazine. Let us move on 5 years to 1991. July 1991 to be precise. And what do we have on the cover here? Yes, I recognise this. This is Space Fleet. And we're going to be seeing a lot more of it throughout. Interesting seeing the people that they've picked out. Robin Dews, Jervis Johnson, Andy Jones, Mike McVeigh, Tim Prowl are our mugshots of the month this month. And we now have Flame Publications and Marauder Miniatures as separate entities, moving to a separate premises just down the road, and still of course using the same factory, but separate premises from the design studio. Here's the release of Mighty Warriors, one of those box games that was designed to increase the younger audience for Games Workshop products, but B, use up all of the excess plastic stock that had to be ordered for, in this case, Advanced Hero Quest. Some snaps from Games Day 91. And here we are, Space Fleet. Aha! Now, at this point, Space Fleet has been released. Here is a discussion of the game, but actually most of this, and there's a lot of it. Oh, this is ship cards, but we'll come back to that. All of this, more ship cards. All of this. Okay, up to there. All of this sizable chunk is just background. And it's background that presumably they didn't have the space to put into the main rulebook. But it's interesting having the world sort of explored in this way. This is 40k starting to be expanded and developed, and some concepts kind of formalized, set in stone. And so we get things like traveling through the warp in here that's been discussed in other places previously, but this is a bit more of an in-depth look at how navigation works, what the kind of time scales are involved, and I feel like this is the start of the world being fleshed out a bit more. And then there are some new components which we've just seen in amongst here, which allow you to play bigger games with battle fleets. So if you've bought Space Fleet, maybe you want to buy a second box, and maybe you want to buy the metal ships and you want to play with bigger boards and you want to play a fleets game. So here are a bunch of rules for expanding it beyond the kind of fairly basic kids-friendly game that was in the box. Now expanding it to a bit like Epic. They're saying here are some rules, and then we're going to release a bunch of new stuff, and the rules for that are going to be in White Dwarf, and we're going to explain it all in a bit more detail. Mike McVeigh is going to tell you how to paint your spaceships. Interesting seeing this design, because of course when Battlefleet Gothic came out, this was very much the shape of the Imperial ships. These had been more sort of left behind the other forms, and the ships were now much more this sort of battleship looking with a city on the back, spaceships. The Eldar stuff still looked fairly sort of Wraith sail based. Here are some lovely greenskins from Marauder Miniatures. Orcs and Goblins on special offer this month, along with the Wyvern. John Blanche shows us some of his recent, at this point anyway, pencil sketches, including some images of people that you may or may not recognise from popular culture. And now we've got an Eldar army, so it's time we had a Blood Angels Space Marine army as well, right? We've got an Ultramarines army, we've got Orcs, we've got Eldar. Time for some more Space Marines, time to paint them red. And here's Andy Chambers discussing collecting and painting Blood Angels. And very in-depth discussion here of painting these guys in the kind of classic scheme, and then these guys in a bit more detail. And again, these were on the or some of these were in the Space War combat cards set, so I'm more familiar with those, but this more sort of orangey scheme that would be very much the Blood Angels orangey red of this era, before they went back red. It's Captain Tycho. He goes back quite far into 40k history, remembering that this is still Rogue Trader, when it's still not in second edition 40k just yet. Here's a discussion on treasure, as you can see in Advanced Hero Quest, how to make use of different treasure monster appropriate treasure. Here's some charts for deciding what type of monster is likely to have what value of goods and what sort of magic items and things on them, and then a discussion of what all of these different magic weapons and rods and cloaks and other things can do in game. Fairly thorough, as you can see. Very thorough. Very thorough. Yeah, it just keeps going. There might be more treasure related stuff in here than there is Space Fleet stuff. And then we get to the back, and we've got, here's the Space Marine Strike Force, and of course the famous Beaky's box for when you want to build your Blood Angels army, of course. Some more metal Space Marines, glorious first wave of Space Marines. There's some really excellent, I think anyway, miniatures in here, including, it's called Sensor here, but we know this guy is Comms Operator Orinoco. Some nice space wombles, especially these guys. They're very wombly with their weirdo weapons. That's a las cannon apparently, but they're very obviously alien weirdo weapons that they've just kind of subcategorized. Would love a squad of these guys, but crazily, even these guys that are, 10, 15 years ago, nobody really wanted these very much. I managed to pick up the bolter guy pretty cheaply, and they go for crazy money now. It's just silly. Chaplains, Tech Marines, medics, librarians. One of my favourite librarians here, the guy, I think he's got like a tractor helmet. It's a sort of cut off beak and a visor rather than goggles. It has quite a different look. But yeah, some lovely, much more wild warriors in power armour here, rather than the very uniformed Space Marines that were to come. And here's those Space Fleet metal ships. Here's the publications for One Fancy Roleplay from Flame, and on the back here, let's do a zoom in. There's those Marauder greenskins with the Fanatics and the Boar Riders at the back here, facing Jez Goodwin's Skaven army that we saw in the last edition. And this very photo was discussed in, I think it was A.D. Wood. Was discussing photography for White Dwarf and how they laid out their scenes, and he mentioned this one particularly. There's a lovely barn here and a lovely house here, but you can see this hedgerow and this fence and then there's a little stretch of road here. And he mentions very specifically that this is the only stretch of road here where it disappears behind the bushes. There's nothing under these guys, and same here. Their bases are disguised by the bushes, and that's the only stretch of road. It stops right there where their bases touch it. And it's just interesting sort of having the photographs dissected in that kind of way. Like, oh yeah, okay. Very much set up as a scene, even though you can imagine this being a game being played. The fanatics have just been released and they're coming this way. There's things charging down the road here. So very much set up as a game layout, but also just thrown together from whatever bits and pieces were dotted around and easily to hand. But looks good, doesn't it? Looks good. I like this difference. Nice seeing the difference in bases on here between the two armies, rather than everything having the goblin green, but I guess it loses a bit of the coherency. Anyway, there we go. I rambled for long enough. Here's the Space Fleet issue, and here's our Amazonia Gothique. So I will leave you with that visage, and I shall see you next week. Take care.